personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds, and this is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know right now. Very happy to have a special guest on the show. She's a star to me on LinkedIn. I love to hear her comments about almost anything. Her name is Masheika Allgood, and she's with AllAI Consulting LLC. She's in the California area, and I have been super impressed with you. You're an AI ethicist, which, just that title alone interests me quite a lot. But I feel like ethicists have their finger on the pulse of the issues that we need to really be thinking about that probably are not yet codified in laws, or maybe should be, or the ways that maybe we're developing or looking at technologies that need to be talked about further. So without further ado, I would love Masheika to tell me a bit sort of about yourself and sort of how you ended up in this particular industry.
Well, thank you. The compliments are lovely. I feel special. I've been watching you as well. I follow your 5-minute talks and whatnot online. You provide really good information. So thank you for having me. A bit about myself. My path to AI was random. Let's just put it that way. I am a lawyer by training. It's what I want to do from very early. But I also have always loved tech. But when I was a young person, tech wasn't really a job, it was more like, video games and what was that, war games. And, it wasn't seen as a career path. And so I went into law, which I loved, but the practice and the professional law are two different things. I was more interested in the profession, but everyone I worked for was really about the practice. And I don't see law in the business sense that a lot of the people did that I worked for. So I had to find, what is my other passion? How can I move forward? And I really like tech. So I went back and got an international business degree, focused on marketing and data analytics. Ended up doing an internship at a hologram startup at an incubator out of Edinburgh University. So I was in Scotland for a little while doing that, which is pretty cool. Came back to Florida, which is becoming a bit of a tech hub, or at least trying to, but at the time was not. And then finally realized I just need to get to California. So threw all my eggs in that basket, came out to California, worked my way up from vendor contractor to long-term contractor, and then finally had enough of that life and was like, I need a contract to hire job. And ended up getting one of those at NVIDIA. I worked at NVIDIA as a product manager on licensing software, enterprise licensing software. But I'm the type of person, when I get bored or aggravated, I need to feed my brain positive things or it spirals. So I got bored and aggravated and was like, all right, what's new? And picked up this book on Claude Shannon about information theory. First thing was, well, what about stuff we can't communicate? Like, how your stomach feels when your mama call your name that right way. You about to get it. Like we can, right? You understand it like when I say it because you felt it, but how do I explain that to someone who hasn't had that experience, right? I can't communicate all the things. So that's what I initially started thinking. And then I started thinking about AI and legal applications, came across the whole Compass debacle. And then because I have an English degree and because I'm language focused, really got into the issues of natural language processing and, the difficulty of, robustness of data and, using it in applications where you don't have robust data. So the first paper I wrote, which actually got accepted for a GTC talk, was about, if I create a natural language processing that's not particularly robust when it comes to accents, what happens if I try to take that to, Alabama, Mississippi, and replace 911 operators? Like, how's that going to work? So looking at it from, an application point of view, this tech that we're putting out, if it doesn't have the robustness, how does that play in reality? And so spent some time at NVIDIA trying to work through AI ethics and started a working group to try to, determine how NVIDIA could do AI ethics in an NVIDIA specific way. We took our ideas to the CEO. He was not interested. And so I kind of figured that there wasn't really a place for me, because it is important to me to feel like, whatever I'm working on is a benefit to society. And if it can't be a direct benefit, at least we're doing no harm, right? I am a lawyer. Ethics is key to who I am. So left NVIDIA, started this ally consulting, spent the initial couple months of quarantine taking courses, so statistics, a variety of AI, just foundational courses, so that I can understand the tech itself and what's under the hood, as well as continuing to read and try to be on the cutting edge of what was going on in research and application space. And yeah, so we've come to this point now where I apparently have garnered a bit of a following on LinkedIn, which is cool. And I'm really starting to, be able to make an impact in these issues that are of great importance to me.
Yeah. I was so excited to try to get you on the show. I love to see your comments. I'm like, yes, because you know how to slice through the issues in a way that I feel like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of times, especially with AI and ethics, a lot of times people try to do what I call, the Beach Boys version of what they think AI is like, and they really do maybe the Jimi Hendrix version of it. Needs to be a little bit more gritty, a little bit more interesting. And I feel like you really do that. So I get excited when I see that you comment like, ooh, what does she say now? What does she say now? I would love to talk about, so you have posted something. I just love your stuff. So you have said something about algorithms are not the problem. And I would love for you to explain that a bit, but I'm just throw something in here that I think is interesting. So, and I agree with what you say, and sometimes people don't want to go down this rabbit hole, which is you were saying that the algorithms are discriminatory, right?
Well,
They
yeah.
discriminate. So it is, to me, discrimination is something that's a knife that cuts both ways. So obviously, if you're creating AI, you're desiring a certain result, right? So it's looking for a certain thing, but then the way that the knife slices the other way is that the thing that they're looking for may be a blind, may create a blind spot for something that may cause harm to someone else, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's completely legitimate. I think the difficulty is all of this stuff is actually R&D. Like the tech is not mature enough to be affecting people's daily lives because we honestly don't understand it. Like when I made that post, I didn't think it would be as controversial because I just felt like we keep tiptoeing around this issue of bias as if it's, something separate from the algorithm. But that's fundamentally what it does. It's a discrimination engine. Like that's its whole point is to classify and to, cluster groups of information. Well, that's discriminatory. Like you can call it bias, you can call it discrimination, but it's the same thing. I'm looking for certain qualities or certain aspects or certain features, and I'm going to classify groups or entities based on that, right? And so that is precisely what it is intended to do. That's how the tool works. And so I think we've been, tiptoeing around it as if it's something separate from the tool without just acknowledging, no, this is what the tool does. The issue then is, well, what do we do with that understanding? And so you've got one, really popular school of thought, which is, well, let's mitigate the bias. Let's see if we can, eliminate it in the data, and let's see if we can, minimize it in the algorithm itself. And I understand that, pathway because it's tech driven. And the issue with tech is we want all of our solutions to be tech, right? So we find an issue with bias and it's like, well, how do we solve this with the tech itself? But if that's what the tool is meant to do, all you're really doing is trying to position it in that, I want to get rid of this kind of bias. So I don't want to do discrimination based on race I want you to discriminate based on, geography and age and these other things, but I don't want you to discriminate on these 4 or 5 factors. So can I choose what you discriminate against technically? But what we really need to be looking at is this is how the tool works. How do we use this tool as it is to benefit us? Right? So that really was what I was trying to do is why are we hiding the fact that bias is the core of AI? It is what it is. So instead of trying to hide that fact and paper around it and solution around it, let's recognize what it is and then use it to our benefit, right? So if AI can illuminate areas of bias, then I can use that in my human decision making in a positive way. It's only a problem when I try to cede all control to the AI itself. So it's the application, it's the automation of human decision making is where that bias becomes harmful. But if I'm using it as an input, then I'm in a position as a human to say, well, okay, well, I'm not going to make that decision because, that's the wrong kind of bias. Like, I thank you AI for bringing that up and letting me know that I've created this model that acts in a way that I don't really believe, but I'm not going to move forward with that. But this push to make the AI the decision maker, to make, the AI take over human mental function, human thought and action is misguided. And that is what's driving us down the wrong road. So instead of trying to solution around bias, we need to just change the problems that we're asking it to solve.
Yeah. So eloquently put. Oh, I just love it. And I say this all the time. I feel like we're abdicating our human responsibility and judgment to AI. And I don't know, probably, I don't want to get in trouble because I have people who work at Disney, but I feel like this is like the Disneyfication of, AI. So it's like,
Well,
I tell
I
people think about people treat AI like it's a teddy bear and it's really a grizzly bear. It's totally different.
well, I see it way more insidious than that. I don't see it as Disney. I think you're putting sheep skin on a wolf. Like when you look at what you do as a developer, if I'm designing AI that is going to determine if people get benefits, that is going to determine if people get accepted into college, if people get offered jobs, even shown jobs, if people get mortgages, if people go to jail, if people stay in jail, if people, have policing constantly around their home. When you look at the applications you're using AI for, you're providing like a tool for a very small group of people to create their will, to impose their will on large groups of society and not allow any recourse. If the AI has an improper input, who do you go to for that? Do you even know AI made that decision? So how are you going to fix it? Right. And so for me, it's not, it is insidious. It is a cruelty and it is a problem. So I don't, I come to it in a very different sense because I was a lawyer and I've seen, how a bad lawsuit or a bad ruling can destroy not just a life, but a community. It can suck the life out of an entire community. When that person, this particular person, some people are pillars and you move them and everything topples. And we can see that and we can argue against that judge or we can appeal that. But when you have an AI system that, oh, the knowledge is proprietary, so you can't even probe, the data we used or how we tuned the algorithm, then you're basically saying those 4 or 5 guys who made decisions, they're determining people's lives who they're never going to meet, who they have no understanding of the devastation they caused, and they will never face consequence for it. So I'm in a much different, like, this is why I post the way that I post, because we can't keep tiptoeing around the danger that is ever present and real right now.
Yeah. Totally right. Oh my goodness. I guess to me is in a way, if I had to describe it to someone, it's like, that mat that you step on when you go to the grocery store and it opens the door, right?
Hmm.
So for someone who's creating this AI, maybe every time they go to the grocery store and they step on the mat, they know that this door is going to open, so they walk through it, and then someone else walks through it, and it doesn't open the door. And so their argument is, well, it opens the door for me. I don't know what the problem is because it doesn't open the door for
Maybe
you,
you're not
but
stepping on it right.
right, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you're not stepping on it right, or just ignoring the fact, regardless of whether it happens to you or not, is harming someone else. What are your
Well,
thoughts about that?
well, I think so. I think there is a level where there's absolute knowledge that what we're putting out is bad. Like when you read, oh God, Facebook, they just came out with a variety of stories on Facebook this week that just pinpoint this issue, right? Clearly, the issues within Facebook go directly to the top. They've been shown to the CEO, and he does what he wants anyway, right? But would I say that the individual developer who was creating that system understood the harm at that time? I don't necessarily know. And one of the questions I asked on my LinkedIn was a question that was brought up by my mentor, Randy Williams. She was like, when I have these conversations about robotics and that, no one's talking to me about carbon cost of, my degree. Like no one's telling me, how much carbon I'm generating and doing all this testing and programming and whatnot with AI. Like no one's having those conversations. And she was like, what are other things that, people aren't learning, when you're going through and you're getting degrees in data science and software engineering. And I think this focus so hard on STEM to the exclusion of all else has put engineers in a position where they don't have, the overarching philosophical, political, social knowledge to put anything they're doing in context. So when I talk to engineers, they're not anti what I say. They're always shocked. They're always surprised. Like I never considered this in that context because that's those aren't those aren't trade skills for engineering, right? I'm a lawyer. My job is to look around the problem. Sociologist's job is to look around the problem. Political science job is to look around, like the arts and the humanities. That's our job, is to look around these problems. Engineering, they funnel focus them from like high school all the way through. And so they don't get this overarching understanding of how the technology fits into regular life. So I don't approach this as in developers or blindly creating whatever. I don't think they've been given an opportunity to have this kind of discussion and to see their work within these kind of contexts.
Yeah. And then I also think one thing that sort of gets people up in arms, especially people, because I work very closely with developers and privacy by design and stuff like that. And I think, you know, a lot of people get upset about this. They assume that the person who's developing has an evil intent. Maybe some do or maybe some don't. So regardless of what the intent is, there is a residual harm that can result that they need to be aware of, down the line, even if it doesn't impact them. So I feel like if these harms impacted the people who are creating them, I think they would develop their tools in different ways. I don't know.
No,
What are
I
your thoughts?
no, I agree with that. That's the whole reason, the argument for having a variety of people in the room, right? Because I've sat in a room and someone said something, I was like, oh, for real? You know how that would play with my
Right.
family? Like, you can't be doing that, right? And so there are
Yeah.
issues of cultural disconnect, and I've worked with people globally, and I don't know every culture. Like I do have in my international business degree, we did a lot of cross-cultural communication, and to learn and be able to like unearth some of these differences. But I am not a culturalist, in any sense of the word. So I have blind spots. And so I've been in situations where people had to check me like, oh, that's not how we say that. That's not how we do that, right? So like I get that. But I think we focus very heavily on the developers themselves. But AI is an ecosystem. AI is a team. You do not develop, engineers are not solely responsible for AI, right? You have product managers. Product managers, like 80% of the job of a product manager, I'm speaking as a product manager, is to provide context to engineering. I would call him my mentor, but he was my colleague. But my mentor, I guess, Andy, he's our head engineer. Why can't I remember his last name right now? But he was the head engineer for my product. I saw him in a meeting like early into my career at NVIDIA, and someone had gotten a little a little extra on the product management side and was trying to tell engineering, like, oh, y'all need to do this in this way. Now, Andy Curry, he very calmly said, it is your job to tell us what you want built. It is our job to determine how to build it. And I was like, oh, thank you, sir. Right. And so he helped me understand the roles within tech. He firmly committed that to me because, yeah, I'm saying it very calmly, but that cut like a knife at the time. So it was legit. So the vibe was like, I was like, oh, this dude is okay. But he was very clear about this is my role as an engineer and that is your role as a product manager. And I came to understand working with him, for some time that my main role, my main function was to give them context, to explain to them why this doesn't work in reality, how the deployment will be affected by you making this decision or that decision, like how users, intend to use this product and why this particular, structure is not going to work for them. We had a lot of conversations about things that they wanted to do with the code that would be cleaner and in computer science terms, more theoretically sound. And I was like, that shit ain't gonna work because my client over here is using it in this way, and that's not how this works. And like, so we had clashes, but they respected it because I was never just coming to them like, oh, I want this for this reason. Like, I had a client that I was thinking of and how they were going to use. So I think part of the difficulty we have in tech, particularly, Silicon Valley tech, is product management has no teeth. Product management is basically product marketing and sales. Like, we don't actually, develop our software, and so we're kind of an afterthought. So we're not providing those key inputs. So I'll take the insurance algorithm that we've heard about, that New York State is suing over, that was heavily biased towards providing services towards sicker white people and less services, I mean, towards less sick white people and less services towards sicker black people. So if you were less sick and you were white, you got more services. If you were more sick and you're black, you got less services. And obviously that's a bad outcome. So somebody should have figured out in testing that that wasn't going to work right. But somehow it made it through testing and it was being used and people found it out. And it was like, well, what is wrong with the algorithm? Is it not working as intended? Well, the developers could not find good data around level of sickness. Like, they didn't really know how to figure that out. So the proxy they used was money spent. So how much money are you spending in insurance? Well, the white people in that area had better insurance and they spent more money, and the black people had less. So you've got an insurance algorithm that's making, life and death decisions based on your finances. Now, if the product management had been on their job and had been speaking to experts in the community, it would have been very clear that that is not a proxy for sickness. And that is actually kind of illegal, or at least if it's not illegal, it's definitely unethical to use it as a proxy. So everyone wants to look at the developers as if, what were they thinking? But there's a whole ecosystem before that gets out into reality. So there were several people along that causal chain who dropped the ball. And the developers may have been the first, but clearly there was a lack of communication between the end customer and the developer to where that got lost in the sauce. And so I feel like, yes, there is a role for diversity in the development teams, but there's also a role for diversity amongst your product management, amongst your what is it, biz dev, amongst, whoever is interfacing with the clients and bringing that information back to engineering. So I think it's a holistic issue of lack of diversity within tech in a broader sense, instead of just a narrow focus on engineering.
Yeah, yeah. You said something, there's no way to debias data, and I'd love for you to go into that. But I want to say, to me, in a way, this is kind of a parallel to data privacy in a way. So it's sort of like what we have now is people say, we're going to bake a cake, and then at the end, we're going to take the eggs out, right? So, so the point is, in order to build these products in a way that doesn't have bias, or it has to be thought about at kind of the fundamental foundational levels, not just something that happens at the end.
No, I fully agree with that. And I think you're right. The way that we've been approaching all of these issues with equity or ethics or privacy or anything of that nature is it's always at the end, transparency, explainability. It's always at the end, can we give, a little something to make people feel okay? And that's just not the way to do it. Like, The issue with data is the whole value of data is its bias, right? If I give you data and every single point along that data is the same, what's the value in that? What insights can I gain? There's nothing, right? The entire point of data is there's differentiation between different people, different classes, different entities. And from that, I can glean some sort of information and knowledge, right? So instead of trying to de-bias data, what we need to be doing is considering what data are we using, as we make these decisions about the algorithm, right? Because we have this current paradigm of all the data all the time. So when I was at NVIDIA, we were having a conversation about, we had some software or some hardware or software that wasn't collecting, data. It wasn't sending no telemetry data back. And so then the question was, well, do we want telemetry data? And then it was like, well, if we have telemetry data, why don't we just do a data dump into a data lake? I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not where the industry is going. We're going to, selectively collecting data and using it for intended purposes. But that is the legacy system. When you look at a whole lot of industries, they just got data lakes at a whole lot of different companies. You just collect all the things and you figure out what you need. But then you end up with algorithms that are based on all of that data when they only needed, specific parts. And now you've got bad data or, unreasonably discriminatory data in with the rest of the data, and now you're screwed, right? So now you're trying to figure it out on the fly. And so I think the better issue or the better approach is more aligned with what you're saying, is let's figure out what we need and why, and bake that into how we build the algorithm, like bake that into the decisions we make along the chain of building the AI product.
Right. Yeah. I guess there's I guess a tension between technology and law in my view. So you're probably the perfect person to ask this question to. But I feel like and this is why I think it's important that you do AI ethics, right? So literally, in my view, ethics is supposed to come before law, in my view, right? And unfortunately, not all laws are ethical. But sometimes people think, and I think this is a huge problem with this sort of AI and systems that make life or liberty decisions about individuals, is that if you wait until the harm has happened, there may not be an adequate redress, right? Where people say, okay, well, we have this law, and then if this bad thing happens to you, then we're going to go, to court or do whatever. And I feel like because the data is about people, right? And it can harm or hurt people in all types of different ways, that I feel like trying to go the legal route isn't a adequate redress, so that it's imperative that we do kind of this work before the harm to try to prevent these harms from happening. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that you've hit the right pathway, but I think it's more dire than you envision because there is no law, right? Like there's no tension between AI and the law because there is no law, right? So part of what I'm doing is creating educational materials for lawyers because we don't understand the tech. We've been way left behind on this. And so, the EU just came out with their draft legislation. China has come out with legislation. The US has got buckus. We got nothing. Like we got a couple things that we're hemming and hawing about. And, there's a couple people who are really into it, but on the broader scale, there's no law regulating AI in any real sense of the word. We don't know under what theory you can sue. So right now, a couple of years ago, Uber self-driving car crashed into a pedestrian who was walking a bike. Uber had made several decisions that made the AI a lot more dangerous, right? So first, they had disabled the automatic braking system because they didn't like the herky-jerky drive. Second, they had created a system where the AI at some point, would give up, but there was no notification system for the driver. And then third, they didn't have any kind of buffer between when a crash would happen and when the AI would give up, right? So all of that comes together into, the AI can't classify this woman and just going back and forth, confused. 1.3 seconds before the crash, it says humans need to intervene. And then there's no notification, no light, no sensor, no anything to say humans should intervene. And so the person who's driving, doesn't do their job, and they crash into this woman and she dies, right? What was the civil liability for Uber? There was none, because there were no laws that you could hold them accountable. And there was just argument over what theory, like, is this product liability? Is this negligence? Is this intentional inflict? Like, what is this? So no one at Uber got sued, but the woman who was sitting in the driver's seat, who didn't react in 1.3 seconds because she was playing on her phone, yeah, she went to jail. So this is the difficulty. Like, they prosecuted the person they had laws for, which is the human, but they couldn't do anything about the entire causal chains of events that was set up by people who made way more money than the human in the seat, because we don't have laws for that. Like, we don't. We have a couple, we have laws that can be used in these contexts, but it's new. No one knows about it. Like, so the law is not in a position to do its job, which means that ethics becomes, it's all we have to protect us, in cases of rogue or runaway, applications of AI. And so it's a bit of a terrifying situation.
Yeah. I guess I'm concerned about the leadership in the world, right? Of especially the US right now, where we're seeing all these different countries at least trying to come up with a strategy around sort of data or AI or whatever. And sort of we're still just kind of doing this whole 57 state thing, and we don't know if we're going to do it on the federal level. And we know if it's an election year, nothing's going to happen or whatever. So I guess I'm concerned about, obviously some countries are taking it more seriously, trying to look at it and trying to at least create some type of illumination in sort of how this data is being handled and what it's doing. So what are your thoughts about, I don't know, like, what should we be doing that we're not doing now? I feel like we're not doing really anything at this point.
So that feeling is, I feel it, like, I get you. But there are efforts at the state and local levels. Like, cities have been banning certain, like facial recognition, and instituting, laws about, what can be on their streets when it comes to self-driving cars and things of that nature. And you've got a couple, I think New York just passed some kind of rule about the cap on DoorDash fees and gig working fees and whatnot. So they're trying to approach it from a labor standpoint. So there are, actions being taken in states and cities and localities. But the difficulty, which I don't think many of us really consider, is tech companies are countries. They are literally the size and the GDP of countries. So when you actually pull up a GDP list and then you go and look at the market cap of the top 10, 15, tech companies, they outrank like a large portion of the world's countries when it comes to market power, right? And so the difficulty at the federal level is trying to rein in a country within your country. Like, our system wasn't set up for that. And so there's just a difficulty with how do we deal with these usurpers in our space? And so what you're starting to see is these antitrust movements, which is, I got to give Elizabeth Warren a lot of credit for that. She saw this before a lot of people did, which is they are too large to regulate. They have subsumed too much of our daily working lives for us to, put rules on them. Like, how do you not use Google? How do you not use Microsoft? How do you not use, Apple or Amazon? Like these companies, and then you've got, companies underneath that provide services that aren't as forward facing, but they still, they enable those companies to grow at the scale, right? And so I think what it's going to take is, breaking these countries down to the size of companies, and then, legislating around behaviors that we don't want to see. We don't want technology making ultimate decisions about people's lives. So that was that human augmenting. That was, using the tool in the proper context. I think once we start creating legislation, it can't be in the same mode of standards and regulations that they're taking within the EU. I think that is great legislation. But I think you also have to have legislation that's purely on, or that is focused more towards use cases and applications. And I don't care if it fits the definition of an algorithm, or if you found a way to strip down an algorithm that doesn't fit the definition of AI. I still don't want you engaging in that behavior. Like it's not the definition of AI that's the issue. It's what you're using computer aided decision making to do. So I think that's a key point where they went left when they should have gone right. But I think the standards that they've created will be useful, and the structure that they've created will be useful. But I think in the US, given where we are and given that we've created this wild, wild west, we need to come in first on applications, things you cannot do with the AI, things that you are will be held liable for if you use AI in these ways. I think we start with that because that's our problem, right? That's what we've wrought upon the world is out of control application of AI in ways that it should not and never be used.
Yeah. Yes, I'm concerned. I'm concerned about many things, but I guess I'm concerned about the consumer element of privacy in the US, where
Hmm.
your rights don't kick in unless you're consuming. So if you can't consume or you're not consuming, that gap is quite wide for that person. And then also AI, the harm, it can be very different for each person, right? So, the example I gave is, let's say you bought lettuce in a store and it had E. coli, and they said, oh, we're going to have this recall because 50 people in this area got sick and throw your lettuce away or something. So the harm happened right away, right? And then you knew everyone was impacted in the same ways. Where
Hmm.
AI, a harm can happen, like maybe this person 6 months from now doesn't get a job, or maybe a year from now
Hmm.
you won't get into school, or this, so the harm can sort of escalate and be in the future, right? So I think I'm concerned about us not really looking in terms of regulation at the human level, just thinking about it in terms of consumerism, and then also assuming that the harm that is created will be the same for each person.
No, I agree. One of the issues that I've been bringing up to attorneys is we tend to focus our standing, like is who can sue, is based on specific types of harm, right? It's based on financial or physical harm. Like those are really the key. You can sue if you've had one of these two issues. But what about reputational harm? Because in the age of AI, in the age of that we're in now with social media, reputational harm is a real tangible thing. But we in the law have not considered that, right? So why don't we revisit our rules on standing and consider the new ways that you can be harmed that are novel, in the law and in the world. And so I think the issue of individualized harm for generalized tech is something that we just don't have a handle on, right? Like, we have this idea of class action, which is great, but some people are harmed more than others. Like if you're younger, and you got, let's just intentional infliction of emotional distress, right? So you see, they just came out with a study that Instagram is actively harming young women, girls, right? So can we sue for intentional infliction of emotional distress? Like, because at what point is it intentional? If you know and you've known for some time and you continue to feed this to these people, just because you didn't point her out individually, is that not intentional? We haven't had these discussions in the law, and regulation and law, one comes before the other, but they go hand in hand. Like the law is an attempt to affirm those regulations, uphold them along with societal norms that have been built around the regulations. So this is kind of like a joint conversation. Whatever the law does, the regulations are going to follow. Whatever the regulations do, the law is going to follow. It's a symbiotic relationship. So we've not had these kind of conversations, but it's a real thing. Like the harm is individualized, right? Because you know, if I am 13 when I start feeling the harm, it's going to be compacted by the time I'm 18, But if someone just got on like 6 months ago, like how much is their harm, right? And so also like some people feel things in different ways. You know what I'm saying? Like the harm of a credit AI being incorrect. Well, if you're only trying to buy a car, it hurts you with your car. But what if you're trying to buy a house? What if it also affects you getting a job? What if it also affects your kid getting into college? Like, that's, I'm an individual person. I make different decisions with my life. This one issue can affect me 7 ways, where it'll affect one other person 2 ways. So I don't know that we have a handle on the fact that, yes, this tech is general, but it creates very individualized types of harm. And if we don't have a private right of action, what's the redress?
Right, right. One thing that Europe has that we don't have in the same way, and a lot of times I feel like, I don't know, maybe we have too much pride, I guess, in the past, in the way we've done things. Can't
In the
realize, well,
past?
maybe we need to do something different, like in the future, Maybe for me, there were no good old days, right? So
That's a good point.
but like one thing in Europe they have, I think is really interesting, is this EDPB, which is a board that recommends regulations about, privacy and security and stuff like that. And so we don't really have that here. I think having some group whose only job really is to sort of look at what's emerging, look at the current harms, right? Look at what's emerging and look at a human level and not like at an industry or sector specific area to be able to suggest changes in regulation. I wish we had that, because I feel like what we're doing is, we need strategies, and right now we just have tactics in some way.
Right.
The tactics are happening. There's some strategy obviously happening on state level, especially in places like California. But as you know, those things sort of build on each other. It's like a pyramid of things that happen. So you can't just do, you can't just take I don't know anything about sports, but you take a football and just think you throw it all through the end zone, and then, wow, okay, we're going to have a federal law, and it just doesn't happen that way. I think you have to get agreement and consensus over and over, year over year, until you sort of build something that really has some teeth to it.
I think what you're talking about, like, we can see an example of that in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, right? It was a huge fight to get that up and running, but their sole job is to look at what is best for consumers in the U.S. markets, right? That was new for us. I think that was Elizabeth Warren too, man. She's been
Yeah,
on her
well, it
job.
was her, yeah.
She's been on her job lately, right?
Yeah.
But but yeah, I think this would be a similar type of bureau. So we got pride issues in a lot of ways. But I think I think this one we just haven't gotten around to yet, right? I think the need is starting to bubble up. Like, you're starting to see actually some bipartisan conversation about, especially social media. Now, obviously, the way it started was some foolishness, but just having them in the space and thinking about these issues is important. And the fact that, whether they be doing it for some really odd reasons, they're still, looking critically at, at these issues when it comes to social media. So expanding that from just focusing on what I can tweet and why are you banning me, into, what algorithms are you creating and why, what user bases are you going after and why. So the fact that people are actually looking at, why would we allow Facebook to have an Instagram for kids when they can't protect kids? They've shown no willingness to protect kids on the main Instagram. Like, those are the kinds of things that I think an independent bureau would be able to tackle, as well as, what is our goal and what our strategy as a nation when it comes to data privacy? Because even within the government, there's a lot of confusion and conflicting, responses and ways that we're addressing it. Should we just encrypted? Should we, how much information do we give to contractors? What technology are we using to share and to keep things private? Like, I think there's a lot of open questions, and people are looking for best practices. And I think a bureau like that, not NIST, I get NIST role, but I don't think it's proper for this particular issue, because they're just a general standards body. Like, you need someone who is in the weeds with what is going on, and really looking to protect, the individual person who owns this data, because we own our data, or we used to, but we technically, like theoretically, own our data. And I think we need, just like the Consumer Financial Protection, we just need a data protection agency. And address how we're giving data to the government and how they're handling it. And then, what is going on in the private sphere. But to have them individually tasked with data protection issues, I think you're right. And I think there may be appetite for that because of all of the issues with hacking and our inability to keep data secure, um, really to any degree, across any of our various forms of government or corporate structures.
Yeah. I would love to see as a foundation for someone somewhere to toss in the Constitution that privacy is a fundamental human right. We don't have
Oh,
that in the US. So I
yeah.
give the example so you're from California, so you
No,
all
I'm
have
from
CC.
Miami.
Oh, you're from
I'm in
Miami?
California. Oh, I'm
Okay,
in
okay.
California, but I'm in California for reasons. So
Okay, okay. Well,
we're not gonna speak on my state.
as a
So
current Californian and in the moment, you all have the CCPA, and it,
yep,
you know, obviously it's the most comprehensive consumer law, right, in the US
yeah,
right now on a state level, but it doesn't cover every industry, right? So an
right.
example I give is, let's say you go into a grocery store, you share your data with them, they have to comply with CCPA, but then you walk
Mhm.
across the street to a church and they don't. So
Yeah,
you're the same human, right? And you want
right.
your data protected regardless of who you're dealing with. It's not you, right?
Hmm.
But I feel like that gap is widening because as some of these laws are being passed, they're creating more exceptions
Yes.
to what agencies can do, whatever. Like almost all, and this is not just the U.S., even in other countries, a lot of, like, for example, DMV, the
Mm.
Department of Motor Vehicles, they're almost always exempted out of this data sale because tons of data
Hmm.
sales happen with them. And so they do a lot of fusion with stuff. So I think, I would love to see, I would like to see people have more transparency with how their
Yeah.
data is being used and more agency. So right now we don't have visibility and then we don't have
Yep.
control.
Well, I think those are really key things that the European regulations bring, into play, right? Because they create those structures for that. And just like with GDPR, America didn't do GDPR, but we follow it because if you're a big tech company, you're doing work in the EU, and then if you're doing work with big tech companies, then you need to, follow the same rules. So I think, once a large governmental body puts out those rules, and that spirit of those rules kind of proliferate throughout the world. So I think that was a big addition. But as to your point about a constitutional amendment, the states got to ratify it. That's a whole process. But I think you would achieve the same goals if there was a statement at the federal level that we view data as a fundamental right, data privacy as a fundamental right, and then create an agency that enshrines that goal into their mission. So I think it comes back to us creating some sort of agency where their entire purpose is to protect, our fundamental right to data privacy.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's really smart. Oh, thank you for that. I hadn't thought about it that way. So if it were your world, Masheika, and
Mm.
if we did everything that you said, what would be your wish for data privacy, whether it be law, technology, human, consumer, robot? What would be your goal or your wish?
Well, I'm old school, right? Like I'm a little older than probably a lot of your audience, but I'm from back in the day when you never gave out your social security number. Like you guarded that thing. Your parents told you from jump. Once you memorized it, don't you write it down? Don't you share it with anyone? Like it was the core to who you were, right? It was in governmental systems, this is who you are. You hold on to it, that is yours. So that to me is data privacy. Like that's the paradigm I grew up in. That's what I'd like to return to is if I want to give you my data for a purpose, it should be for that purpose. And if I want it back, I should get it back. Like I just feel like, it's like anything else. If I buy something and I don't like it, I get to return it. If I give you money for a service and I don't like it, I get to recall it. So I think we treat data transactionally in the same way that we treat money. It ain't for everybody. You can't just have it because you want it, because you found a cool way to use it. I have to authorize it. If you go on my bank account and take my money, we're gonna fight, right? But you can go
Absolutely.
and grab my data from whoever, and I can't do nothing about it. Like, when did that happen? So,
Right.
they keep saying data's the new oil, data's the new money. Well, give me the same rights that I have over oil and money, right? Like, if
Hmm.
you see it as that key, then you need to pay me for it. Like, why are you creating this globally scaled, behemoth, and I'm not getting any money? You needed my data to create it, right? So how am I not getting paid? So I feel like we speak out of both sides of our mouth when it comes to data. We want to treat it like, it's oil and it's precious, and it should be treated in a certain way. But then when you get it from me as an individual, you act like it's nothing. So I kind of feel like um, it's the same mentality that America and European countries have taken to South and Central America, to Africa, where we mine you, for your natural goods, and then we've changed it into something different, and now it has value, right? But if you weren't able to get those natural goods, then you wouldn't be able to do what you're doing. So I just feel like we're using those same tactics and structures around data that have proven to be, discriminatory and uh, what do you call it? Exploitative, throughout the course of modern history. So I think it requires a fundamental shift in how we interact with the world, and not allowing, American companies to colonize Americans or anyone else. Your data is a resource, and it should be treated as a resource. So if it were up to me, I would treat data as a resource, and that's how we would move forward.
Wow, this is fascinating. I could talk to you for hours. This is amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on the show, and I love your point of view and the things you're doing. And I definitely follow you, and I can't wait to see all the things you talk about. And I hope everyone else will be able to tune in and connect with you as well, because I think that you're having very important conversations that other people aren't having. So you kind of stick out in great ways that I love. So, yeah.
Well, all I can say is thank you. I got on LinkedIn heavy last year just because I had things I was thinking about, and I curated my feed to make sure that I was getting a lot of information from people who were, sharing a lot of stuff. And yeah, so what you're seeing now is the result of all that study and work. And I'm just glad it's beneficial. Like, it was mainly for me to be able to argue with people who I felt weren't looking at things holistically. And then it became this platform. So I do want to give a shout out to liberal arts,
Mhm.
because I think it gets a bad rap because it's not immediately money generating
Mhm.
type of thing. But the
Mhm.
reason I think the way I think is because I'm an English major with a law degree. I would
Right.
not think this way if I had grown up straight STEM. And
Yeah.
so I just want to put out there that there is value in something besides, we can't treat education like trade. There
Right.
there are trade schools, and
Right.
there are places where you go to specifically learn a trade. But
Mhm.
undergraduate is supposed to round you out as a person, help you better
Mhm.
understand the world around you, to be
Mhm.
able to verbalize and connect and communicate, outside of your bubble. And
Yeah.
the more we lose that, the harder time we're going to have with data privacy, AI ethics, because you're creating people who just don't have any understanding or any ability to critically see their role in the wider structure of the world.
Yeah, I love that. I was a philosophy major in college, and
Ah,
I
cool.
must tell you, from my mother was horrified,
Oh yeah.
horrified.
Oh yeah.
She
I
just
can see
couldn't
that.
understand it. It was so bad. Oh my God. Because I mean, she was growing up, you want to be a nurse, you go to school to be a nurse, you go to be a
Mhm.
doctor or a lawyer. So she just could not comprehend why I wanted to do it. But it's helped me a lot in my career. So I taught myself, I'm self-taught in terms of technology. And it just fascinated me. But to me, philosophy, that theme to me, I sort of weave it through my work because everything has
Yeah.
philosophy, right? Like, so before someone created a spoon, they had a thought that maybe if I bent metal a certain way, I could use it to eat cereal, right?
Mm.
So being able to try to translate that into like practical things, I think is really important. And I agree about sort of rounding things out and being able to communicate, right? So I think that's a big problem that we have a lot, especially, that's why I think your work is really important, where we have to break down those walls. We have to break down those silos where we
Mm.
where we kind of thought, okay, in order to be, successful or whatever, we're going to create these Santa workshops where this person only has tunnel vision. They only look at one thing, where you're building something bigger and it may not be what you want, or it may create some type of harm. So being able to break those silos down and have people like you who know how to communicate across those different silos is very important.
Agreed. I just want to say thank you for your time. This has been a lot of fun. I never considered that you would contact me for this. I just been liking all your stuff because it's awesome. So this is a joy and an honor, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, I was so thrilled. I just could not wait to get you on the show. I think I sent your email it was like 2:00 in the morning. Oh my God, you got to be on the show. I just read your thing. So I'm really happy to have you on the show, and I'm sure we'll be able to talk more, and we're going to definitely follow your work.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much.